My fellow Americans, welcome back. 2026. While you were doing holiday hangovers and New Year's and turducken comas, the Trump administration was continuing its unrelenting march towards reforming national security. In the wee hours of 2025 and into early 26, they have done more in 20 days, 30 days than the last 10 years of Department of War and executive branch leadership, to be completely frank. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to go over a review of 2025, just in case you missed something. And the funny part is when we get into like the latter end of the list, basically, if you checked out around Christmas, you missed a lot. So let's get you started at the top. January 2025, Trump gets inaugurated. Immediately following that is a slurry of executive orders, right? So Professor Mike hat on, right? Executive orders carry the weight of law, are not law. They're written out by, they're signed out by the president. The next president that comes in can cancel them all, as we saw this administration do immediately. Their first executive order action was to cancel something like 80 executive orders from the last administration. That's kind of course of business at an administration turnover, so no big concern there. But then they come out with just like a barrage of their own, very, very national security focused. These are deep, technical, nuanced issues that have been plaguing the community for a decade. This goes back to Ash Carter and Donald Rumsfeld trying to fix these problems. Like, they go after it precisely almost day one. So right off the bat, Iron Dome for America. Later on, we're going to refer to it as Golden Dome, but this basically takes the concept that's in place in Israel right now of a missile defense system for the entire country. We are going to see this rapidly expand to not only missile defense, but all defense of the homeland out into the Western Hemisphere, and then multi-domain. We don't just face threats from missiles today. It's all domain. It's in cyber. It's in space. It's in the maritime domain. And you're going to see Golden Dome really take on an all domain characteristic as the year progresses. But right off the bat, Iron Dome, soon to be Golden Dome for America. Next is prioritizing military excellence and readiness, going after standards issues, going after requirements issues, eligibility issues. This was signature from this administration about getting back to the warfighter ethos, the warrior ethos. For folks on the business side, for the startup communities, this matters because they're changing ways that we're doing business as well. And programs that benefited different pet projects of other administrations are going to start to fade away. And this is the catalyst of that. Following that, executive order on restoring America's fighting force. This is training consistent with modern warfare and getting rid of unnecessary programs that focus on things that don't have to do with lethality and warfighting. Again, refocusing. Why beyond that's the military's job, literally the one and only job, is to be so intimidating that they deter our adversaries from doing bad guy shit, or if necessary, defeating them in combat, aka fuck around and find out, which has now become a defense doctrinal term. But that's the point. It's all that the military does. So getting back to that warrior ethos, why does that also matter, especially if you're in the business community? You're a startup. Man, look at your branding. Look at your marketing. Look at your messaging. Like, this administration is talking warfighters. It's talking lethality. It's talking about standards. It's talking about combat application, real life modern warfare combat application, right? Your facts don't have feelings kind of thing, right? It's if we need to fight a war, we need capabilities that our warfighters have that are going to help them win that war. The idea that you're getting a contractor a trophy for participation or a cookie because you're kind of some special program thing. That doesn't fly anymore. So you need to be leading with your combat application, your user feedback, your application to the modern battlefield, because it is uninteresting at this point to anyone in the department that you're the first purple three-legged man who created a company, and for that I should get a contract. That just doesn't fly anymore. And you have to know that. That's not political. That is, you have to know your customer, and this customer cares about warfighting and lethality. The onslaught of EOs for national security will continue. Next, we have an EO on unleashing prosperity through deregulation. Okay, so again, Professor Mike hat on. EOs are not law. When Congress passes a law, it's usually pretty high level, right? It's sometimes there are a lot of pages, like the National Defense Authorization Act is like 5,000 pages. But each little part of it is usually a paragraph or two, sometimes maybe a page. That's not enough to run a government on. It's just to tell the executive branch what to do. And then the executive branch is required to explain how they're going to do that. That happens through the regulatory process, which then carries the weight of law in the execution of the government, the executive branch. On average, these numbers are squishy, but they're pretty accurate. In a 2-year session of Congress, so our sessions of Congress are 2 years long. Members of the House are elected for that 2-year period. Members of the Senate are 6 years, and then 1/3 is up for re-election every 2 years. So that's how you get your voting cycle. In the 2-year session of Congress, on average, 20,000 pieces of legislation are introduced to the Congress. 20,000. Now, there's a lot of reasons why that happens. Some are pure messaging, because a member of Congress wants to go back to their constituents and say, I'm doing something. Look at what I'm doing. That's their means of doing something. And so they introduce a piece of legislation that in many cases, not another human being on the planet would ever put their name on that, but it doesn't matter. That's what they have to do for their constituents, is attempt to pass legislation. Others are ridiculous things that we need to pass laws for, like naming post offices, naming a mountaintop, naming a park under the federal jurisdiction requires a law. When you get down to it, at the end of a 2-year session of Congress, about 200 pieces of legislation actually become law, passed through committee, voted out on the floor of both chambers of Congress, and sent to the president for signature. Of those 200, less than half of them are what people actually think of laws. A lot of times they are post offices and mountaintops and parks and naming a coin after somebody or having a day of remembrance. Like 75 of the 200 are really like what you would think of as a law. In contrast, 3,000 plus regulations go into effect every single year, which carry the weight of law. You can get fined, you can get arrested for regulatory violations, which means the executive branch does a whole lot more law-ish writing every year than the Congress actually does. The imbalance is striking. And these are the things that affect our everyday life. It's a lot less the laws, and it's a lot more of the regulation if you really dig into what makes people's lives miserable. So this executive order, unleashing prosperity through deregulation, says there is a 10-for-1 rule. You want a new rule that will apply to defense, Department of War, acquisition, contracting, you need to remove 10. So for every good idea you have, you need that good idea needs to kill 10 others. Massive, like master class in how to actually fix things, right? It's the under the hood shit. It's not the big hand wavy, oh, we're going to start a new innovation program. It's deregulate. Get rid of the reason that I need to have 17 pieces of paper to do this thing that in the private sector I would do with none of that, right? After that, they did, in my opinion, the largest, greatest, and most important thing that has happened in national security, potentially, maybe definitely, since the Goldwater-Nichols Act in 1986. There was a process in the Department of Defense called JSIDS. And to be completely honest, I don't even remember what it stood for, but it was the process of creating a requirement. And now you're like, wait, what do you mean a requirement? In my world, and in the world of anyone who gives a shit about our service members on the front line, or anybody who has any common sense, a requirement is something that someone needs. If I'm a Marine in, a combat deployed organization and I don't have night vision so I can fight at night, that's a requirement. I raise my hand and I go, hey, I don't have night vision. And you would assume someone goes and gets that for you. That's not what I'm talking about here. And that's not how it happens either, by the way. How it happens is a big requirement, a validated requirement that has to go through a process where every general in the world seemingly has to approve that Marine gets night vision. That process on average took 800 days. That is unsustainable and incongruent with how fast the modern battlefield works. Everybody has seen that over the last 2 years in Ukraine. If we waited 800 days to buy a drone, the war would be over and Russia would have used 10, 20, 100 different drones in that process. So they killed it. The Department of War has killed JSIDS. They began the process to kill JSIDS. This establishes the 500-page validation loop that caused 800 days to determine how many bolts go in that airplane. It eliminates the JSIDS manual instructions and all JSIDS governance to be replaced by a system that is at the top level called the key operational problems. The department will now buy things based on their biggest threats rather than some bureaucratic maze of jujitsu ninja shit you need to do at the end of the day to only cut a contract to Raytheon, Boeing, and Lockheed because they're the only ones who know how to survive as a business through an 800-day waiting period to even decide you're going to buy a thing. Like, let's put this in context. I say this all the time. If you treat your politics, and in this case, your government, but if you treat your government and your politics like you treat yourself, most of the shit the government does not make sense. This would be equal to, there was a really bad storm, a tree fell on my house, now water is flooding into my house and I have a hole in my roof, and we're going to take 800 days to decide if we should fix the roof or get a new roof or move. You would never do that. You would pretty quickly figure out how to plug the hole, rebuild or repair the roof, or decide if the house was, just fucked and you have to go get another one. But like, this wouldn't take you over 800 days. That was on average. There are some that go longer. Kills all of that. Now they're going to say key operational problems. In that instance, my key operational problem is I have a fucking tree in my house. I'm going to do what I need to do to fix that. And we are going to focus around problems and solving them. This is not only the elimination of one of the greatest hurdles to startups and new entrants in defense, but it changes the paradigm that makes it a lot easier for everybody to conceptualize where the department is going and where those needs are going to go. because you don't have to have a top secret clearance to watch the news. And if you start looking at where the problems are, or in this case with this administration, just listen to what they say. I mean, they will tell you, like, Golden Dome, we are going to protect America. Multi-domain, we're going to defend the homeland. Well, put two and two together. See if your thing that you do protects the homeland. If so, you're on message, you're on brand, you're on your key operational problem. Now, there's going to be steps after that. I got it. But like, at least it gives everyone a good starting point. And this administration is very clear about what they need. So this sets the stage for everything else that's going to come after that. So now, if everybody doesn't know, we have a Secretary of Defense, the Honorable Pete Hegseth. We also have a Deputy Secretary of Defense. The Deputy Secretary of Defense, you could think of this person as typically the COO of the Department of War, where the Secretary would be the CEO. It's usually a role for somebody who is more budget, acquisition, finance, management kind of geared. In our current case, the Honorable Steve Feinberg is the Deputy Secretary of War. Steve Feinberg comes out of an organization called Cerberus Capital. Cerberus Capital is a private equity firm, but a very interesting one. If you don't know about Cerberus Capital, do some research. They're a private equity firm, just like all of them. They make investments and buy businesses and get returns on that. But at their core, they have always been national security focused. In very public and very blowing instances where the U.S. government doesn't have the tools to do things that I think everybody would agree they should have, Cerberus has stepped in and fixed the problem. Let me give you an example. Back in 2015-16, in Subic Bay, Philippines, there is a ship maintenance and repair facility that our U.S. Navy utilizes when they're in the Pacific. In fact, it is the only one that they use. It was owned by a Korean company, and that Korean company was going bankrupt. So guess who wanted to buy it? That's right, the CCP.
Don't trust China. China is asshole.
The Chinese Communist Party was very interested in owning the only repair facility that the Navy uses in the South Pacific. Weird. The U.S. government did not at the time have tools to acquire this facility. Yeah, you talk about real irregular warfare, real deep statecraft. The CCP acquiring that would have been a huge issue for our Navy. Cerberus Capital ponied up $300 million to buy that facility. Yeah, right. They're a private equity firm. There had to be a business case there. There was, clearly, and they stepped in and did it. Well, that dude is now our Deputy Secretary of War. We now have an economic defense unit. The economic defense unit creates internal capital programs for loans, grants, and other tools to bypass traditional contracting bottlenecks and enable scaling of non-traditional businesses. How about them apples? We got a guy as the COO of the Department of War who not only understands business, but finance, investing, growth, and returns. Crazy. EDU it's still forming up. It's getting its legs under it, but I have all of the hope in the world that it's going to do great things. Under the past administration, an organization that had its roots in the first Trump administration and then was ultimately authorized, appropriated, and put into action under the Biden administration was the Office of Strategic Capital. That is in the same functional area as where the Economic Defense Unit will ultimately operate. The Office of Strategic Capital is essentially the bank of the Department of War that can provide loans and loan guarantees and other programs similar to the 180 other federal loan and grant and guarantee programs that we have. VA home loan, for instance, right? The VA is a bank. The the VA gives out home loans, right? We have 180 federal loan programs. The Department of War didn't have one. The Office of Strategic Capital is that. This is in that ecosystem, and I'm sure they're figuring out their swim lanes, and they will figure out how to best take care of really what is the world of economic warfare and irregular warfare in a way that China and their Belt and Road Initiative, their digital Silk Road, and all of these things are very, very good. And we are very, very bad, or we're very, very bad at doing it. We obviously have the people with the knowledge and abilities to do it. As a government, we've been very bad at engaging in this area, and we're turning the page on that. Office of Strategic Capital being a big part of that, and then now the new EDU. So we have a national security presidential memo following the EO on Golden Dome. Iron Dome for America changes to Golden Dome, prioritizes National Missile Defense Shield, reallocates resources for global missile threats as a top technical priority, and identifies, rightfully so, the Missile Defense Agency and Air Force Space Force as the lead agencies to handle this for our country. Obviously, there's going to be a huge Department of Homeland Security play in this as well on their side of the aisle. The Department of War kicked off an independent acquisition workforce study. Now, you may say, Mike, why is that important for me in a startup? Well, for two reasons. One, there's approximately a 30% workforce shortfall in contracting and acquisition professionals, which means you could do everything right. You could make the best product in the world, and you could talk to all your customers, and you could hire the best business development guys on the planet to find you a customer that has money. If you don't have a contract, you still don't go straight to go and collect your $200. You are still screwed in yet another valley of death where you're like, oh shit, I don't have a contract to put this on. Yeah, that's a real thing. Some people haven't gotten to that problem yet. Some people have. You know what I'm talking about. They did an independent acquisition workforce study to assess acquisition personnel needs, aims to optimize the workforce for streamlined processes and reduce bureaucracy. The first part of the problem and why it applies to you is because we don't have enough people to write contracts. Therefore, even with all of the other pieces, you still have zero monies. You're still not delivering your capabilities to the warfighter, and we're all still losing. But secondly, as you will see here, the department is going to start focusing on more agile business tools, commercial solutions openings, other transaction authorities. A lot of acquisition professionals that came up in the last 20 years of FAR-based contracting, you know, the 20, 30, 50 page proposals and the endless this, that, and the other, NAICS code, all that shit. That's how they're used to doing business. And understandably so. They have a legal responsibility to obligate and execute federal taxpayer dollars. There's a lot of risk in their job, and these new tools are very fast, they're very streamlined, and they're non-traditional. Other transaction authorities, right? And they don't like using them. So not only do we need more people, but we need more people to come on board and be trained in the utilization of these more efficient tools so they're comfortable using them. And we need to retrain the workforce in the older workforce that's mostly FAR-based in utilizing these new tools in a way that gets capabilities to the warfighter faster, hence supporting new entrants and small and startup communities trying to enter the defense space, which we need to deconsolidate the last 30 years of 5 companies pretending that they can do everything. More Golden Dome. The reference architecture was laid out there, how they're going to do a 4-layer system, including space sensors, ground radars, interceptors, and directed energy. This is obviously a classified document, but if you're on any of the Golden Dome contracts, the Missile Defense Agency, Shield IDIQ, and you've gotten some contracts there, you will get access to this so you understand what they're actually doing to build Golden Dome. That is obviously also a work in progress. Their initial estimate on Golden Dome, I want to say, is something around 150 billion. I would probably say throw a zero at the end of that. At the end of the day, Golden Dome's going to definitely clock in at over $1 trillion. I typically don't speculate, but you quote me on that one. When we put the done stamp on Golden Dome, it will be unquestionably over $1 trillion. Under the last Trump administration, the adaptive acquisition framework was put in place. These are streamlined and defined processes, checklists, milestones, reviews for how to deal with different buying activities and different products differently, right? The first Trump administration did a lot of defense acquisition reform as well. This is probably the largest and most lasting one out of the first administration. And this was the first initiative to say we should not be buying software like we buy aircraft carriers. Obviously, any person with common sense knows that, but that wasn't how the department was operating at the time. So the adaptive acquisition framework lays out how the business processes behind buying different things. There's a software pathway, which we can buy as close to a commercial software purchase as the department's probably ever going to get to, right? You just buy a license, and at the end of the year, they tell you need to re-up your license, and you can do that or not, right? We didn't do that before. It also lays out major defense acquisition programs, the things that do need to be built over a series of years with many milestones and many checks and many reviews to make sure that we don't have billion-dollar disasters like, the Zumwalt or the LCS or the KC-46 or any of the other billion-dollar major defense acquisition programs, formerly ACAT ones, that have wasted billions and billions of dollars because they didn't do them correctly. And then there's a bunch in between. So the first memo that we see that leverages the adaptive acquisition framework from the last administration is a mandate from Secretary Hegseth to utilize a software acquisition pathway for software. You're like, why does that not make sense? Why wouldn't I use the software acquisition pathway to buy software? Go back to your acquisition professional issue. That's not how people are used to doing things. It's still a new process. Some people used an old, FAR-based, antiquated way of doing things. They didn't use the pathway in the way that it was provided to use. So this directive from Secretary Hegseth says you will use the software acquisition pathway for software. Nuts. So Secretary Hegseth is amazing in my opinion because he's what we call in the military a big blue arrow commander. All right. So imagine this, right? It's a big map. It's World War II. Good guys over here, bad guys over here. And it's like, okay, well, we're going to go to France and we're going to kill all Nazis. And there's like just a big blue arrow that says, go to France and kill the Nazis. Obviously, there's more planning that goes into it than that. But the highest level military commanders don't get down into the weeds. They say, go do that. Big blue arrow. Secretary Hegseth is big blue arrow commander. He says, go do something. And then lets his technical and subject matter experts deal with the how, the why, the minutia. This came out in the memo in a way that made me smile. It basically said, you will use the software pathway. Also, you will use it said the greatest extent possible. Again, we'll link all these things so you can read them all. Use to the greatest extent possible. Commercial solutions openings. What does that mean? It means the first thing you're going to do is go ask the commercial industry if they already make this thing. We're not going to go to some lab or DARPA and be like, hey, DARPA, do you think you could make us up like a software that, connects people? And I don't know, maybe we'll call it like LinkedIn or something. And they're like, yeah, no, we could totally make like a networking software. Just give us like 5 years. And instead of that, we're just like, we're going to go ask the industry if they make this, and then we're going to buy their software. And if we need to tinker with it a little bit, that's fine. But a commercial solutions opening says, do you have something right now that I can buy? If the answer is yes, here's your contract. That's the right way to do business, especially for software. So it's, you will software acquisition pathway to the utmost, use commercial solutions openings, and then contract them through OTAs. It wouldn't make any sense in the world if you went out to the commercial industry and said, hey, do you have something I can buy right now? And then you put it on a FAR-based contract that took you 6 months to write the contract. You have to use other transaction authorities so you can get it on contract in like 30, 60 days. This goes back to the acquisition workforce issue of, we need people who know how to do this. And this has not been the standard forever. So Pete comes in, Secretary Hegseth, the Honorable, goes, big blue arrow, software acquisition pathway, CSO, OT. Pete sends it off. 1 page. Chef's kiss. Brilliant. That's how you lead, ladies and gentlemen. Give directive and let your people do their thing. Coming out of that, we got directive again from the Honorable Deputy Secretary, Mr. Feinberg, who had a workforce acceleration and recapitalization initiative. This is where you saw the fork in the road, the deferred retirement programs, the DERP, stupid name. So this was ordering workforce recapitalization to flatten hierarchies, reduce civilian footprint, and revive our warrior ethos to rebalance the civilian workforce, consolidate functions, and focus on fiscal discipline and digital operations. Okay. This is the Honorable Feinberg coming in with his private equity hat on and going, I just bought this business and I looked under the hood and it's a fucking mess. Why do you have 10 people and 10 business sectors that all do the same thing? No wonder you're going broke. You have too much redundancy, too many duplicative efforts. Nobody knows what they're doing and everybody's bad at doing the thing that somebody else is doing. We're going to bring everybody back to the charter level. We're going to streamline what they do. We're going to get rid of offices that are redundant and duplicative, and we're going to laser focus on getting the job done. You can look at this as a lean business process overhaul of the entire Department of War. New things are going to have to happen, but new things can't happen until we stop doing the things that we shouldn't be doing. And now, I've been out of the Pentagon for a while. My last time I had unescorted Pentagon access was, let's call it 2+ years ago. So with outdated information of about 2 years, I can still tell you that then there were human beings with shopping carts moving paperwork around the Pentagon for signature. That is correct. The best businesses in the world are Fortune 10 companies, which are the only analogous organizations to the Department of War and not even close, do not move paper for signature around their organization in shopping carts, I promise you. As of 2 years ago, we were doing that. Those people probably need to find different jobs to do. And our private equity executive, who now runs our department, is doing that. No big surprise there. All right. More EOs. Modernizing defense and acquisition and spurring innovation in the defense industrial base. This is comprehensive acquisition reform. Mandates first preference for commercial solutions openings. Again, this is music to the ears of startups and investors around the world. I have something you can buy right now. How about you just buy that one instead of spending 2 years in research and development to make something that looks kind of like what I make, but way worse? Just buy my thing. Utilizing other transaction authorities, directed a 60-day implementation plan to eliminate acquisition inefficiencies, review all major defense acquisition programs for potential cancellation if they are greater than 15% behind cost, schedule, or performance. Yeah, that is a direct shot at all of the big guys who got these huge programs and they're taking forever to deliver. Ladies and gentlemen, if shit pops off in the Pacific today, we're fighting with what we have, not with what's on some whiteboard somewhere to deliver in 2030. It's just not a real thing. All right, more EOs. Restoring common sense to the federal procurement. I love EOs. You can name them whatever you want. Golden Dome for America. AI dominance. Restoring common sense to federal procurement. It overhauls the federal acquisition regulation, replaces regulations with buying guides, and streamlines the supplements, very specifically the DFAR. So if the federal acquisition regulation for buying in the federal government isn't enough, the Department of Defense War has its own DFAR, the Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation. More rules on top of the 7,000 pages that are already in the FAR to begin with. Yeah, clean that up. EO for unleashing America's offshore critical minerals and resources. I don't know how many startups are doing offshore mining, but this is, if nothing else, a signal to not only American energy dominance, which has been a staple of the Trump administration in both of the terms, but or dominance and sovereignty of our natural resources and critical minerals and the things that we need to make our defense technology. I don't think anyone has been living so far under a rock for the last, 5 years that we don't know that China's got us in a really bad spot on a lot of the really down the supply chain things. Rare earths, critical minerals, things that are all over the periodic table that I did not study when I was in high school, germanium and cobalt and all these things. China's got a corner on a lot of those markets, and we need that to do technology. So if nothing else, we're trying to get those assets back in so that everybody can make the things that they want. All right. At this point in the year, we start seeing the services align to the directives, orders, regulations, executive orders, and then legislation is coming, but folks are, aggressive and they're going to get after it and they're going to start leaning in. Army transformation doctrine. The Army was the first to jump into the breach here, and they are focusing on force structure, eliminating wasteful spending, reforms to acquisition, modernizing contracts to align with warfighting priorities. So everybody says this. Every administration, every secretary of the Army has a modernization and reform campaign. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they're led from the service secretary side, the civilian politically appointed leader, or sometimes they come from the service chief side, the uniformed service member that runs that branch of the military. A very successful example of a modernization plan that actually worked was the Marine Corps Force Design 2030, when they woke up one day and said, hey, if we want to fight in the Pacific, we don't need tanks and we don't need heavy breaching and engineering, because guess what? That doesn't move from island to island. We're going to go ahead and cut those away. The Army was the first one in this administration to align to this new directive, and they came out of the gate hot, specifically with a lot of lessons learned and some best practices from the war in Ukraine over the last few years since 2022. The Army put out a proposal not too long after this that said, if you can make 10,000 drones for $2,000 a piece, call. I like that. No JCIDS process for how many screws have to be in the drone or what color it needs to be, or does it have 4 blades or 5 or 6? Who gives a fuck? Can you make 10,000 drones in a year, and can you do them for $2,000 a pop? Call me. We can do business. Amazing. Army. Go Army. They are leading the pack in that for sure at this point. Okay. Then we have Golden Dome, or Iron Dome, being renamed to Golden Dome, and $175 billion announced to build out the system. I don't do a lot of speculation, but I will venture to my producer a $24.99 ethically approved steak dinner wager that by the time that's done, you could throw another 0 at the end of that. When we put the done stamp on Golden Dome, it's easily over $1 trillion. This is like tranche 1 at $175 billion. But what's going to have to go into that is unfathomable. That's $1 trillion program easy. But they changed the name from Iron Dome to Golden Dome and said we got $175 billion to do it. Great. All right. More on the civilian side. Performance-based personnel reform, not really different from anything else that they were doing, but they're basically going back and saying, are you coming in every day and checking the box? Are you the sloth from Zootopia? Or are you actually working for the warfighter to get them the things that they need? If you are the latter, you probably need to go away. Again, that's personnel reform stuff. Like, most people are like, why do I care about a bureaucrat in the Pentagon? It's because whether you know it or not, they're the ones making your life hell, along with all these other problems. And the administration is trying to clean that up. Hopefully, the outcome of this is we have people who work across the Department of War and generally the national security apparatus who think like, I don't even know what they think like. They think like people who know that they have a really important job and they wake up every day and trying to do that rather than serving a system to serve the system, right? It's the difference between doing things right and doing the right thing. There's a culture in specifically the Pentagon and the civilian side of the workforce, which I love, by the way. Like, let me just throw that out there. I am not a hater of our civilian Department of War workforce. I think they are amazing human beings who do an amazing job at the things that they and only they can do. They are the continuity that allows the warfighters and the uniformed personnel to do the things that they need to do. We should not have uniformed personnel stationed at the Pentagon for 20 years. They should be leading commands and leading troops and modernizing the services and being prepared on 24 hours notice to be America's 911 force globally, right? We need civilian workforce. Don't get me wrong. But in the paradigm of doing the right thing versus doing things right, if your bureaucratic system says you have to check 50 boxes before you're allowed to do something, a civilian employee, leader, GS person incurs personal liability at the tune of potentially getting fired or charged with a crime if they don't do their 50 steps right. Therefore, they serve the system. They're going to do things right. This administration is asking, are we doing the right things? And if the right thing is serving the warfighter and ensuring that they can deter our adversaries from doing something dumb, and in the case that they have to fuck around and find out, which is now a military doctrine term, they will win. If you're serving the system that does not deliver to the warfighter, you're not doing the right thing. And that's where the focus of this administration is in all of this work. It's getting back to doing the right thing rather than doing things right in a system that should not even exist. After that, we got a 60-day acquisition reform plan. That is the guidance that says, go do this shit. And then we have our first of really 2, maybe 3 massive legislative actions for the year. We have the passage of the One Big Beautiful Bill, Public Law 11921. Also known as 2025 reconciliation, and then all the other terms out there. OB3, I've heard. One Big Beautiful Bill. Anyway, reconciliation. Back. Professor Mike on the stand. Oh, by the way, I always forget to mention these things. We have partnered with the University of Tennessee to this year kick off a government federal operations, government business, go-to-market, business development and government operations, executive education, graduate certificate program, so you can learn all this shit. 5-day crash course, come to DC, hang out. We'll discuss all of this in depth. You'll walk away with a toolbox full of things and stuff and tools and formats and cheat sheets and all of the things you need to walk away 5 days later and be like, oh, not only do I get this now, but I know how to go back to my company and action all of this. Because there's one thing to have an international relations degree or something like that. My undergrad's in strategic studies and defense analysis. It's a Bachelor of Science that's like, how does a heat-seeking missile do its thing? And then also studying like why China's asshole, right? Or not China, the Communist Chinese Party is asshole, right? Okay, that's fine. Or you go out and get an MBA and you're going to get all the big macro stuff and it's going to be finance and accounting and business theories and lean. And okay, great. None of that actually helps you do this shit, right? This is very, very specialized. I equate it all the time to like going to Marine Corps boot camp makes you a Marine. Going to the School of Infantry teaches you how to be an infantryman. You need to go to sniper school to learn how to become a sniper because there's special gear, there's special equipment. It's a specialized skill set that does a thing. If you're doing this, your MBA is like, okay, cool. But this is an art and a science, and it is a full-time job and a full-time study. And we consolidated that into a 5-day crash course that then has 6 months of distance education where we literally get together and talk about what's going on in the world, what's new, go over these incredibly dense topics as everybody tries to like pull them apart. We workshop them, and then we come back the end of the course and we bring in people from industry and government leaders to review all of this and basically go through a torture test to see if you actually retained any of this, which is shaping up to be a pretty fun event for our worst course. So stay tuned for that. Didn't mean to turn that into a commercial, but we are in fact doing all of this for that purpose because this is a full-time job that you need to be thinking, living, and breathing all the time. That said, one big beautiful bill passed and now it's executing. So Professor Mike hat on. Follow me here for a second. Congress, Article 1, Section 9, no funds will be drawn from the Treasury without the appropriation of Congress, appropriates dollars for the executive branch to spend. Each time they appropriate dollars, there's rules of how they can spend that money. At the highest level in the Department of War, we have colors of money. Other federal agencies deal with their money different, but in the Department of War, we have colors of money. Operations and maintenance funds are 1 year money. At the end of that fiscal year, they're gone. Use it or lose it. That's where we get the fire drills at the end of the year where people are just buying like random shit because they don't want to lose their money. We have research and development, which is 2 year money that allows you to spend that money over 2 years to research and develop things, which usually take longer than a year. We have procurement dollars that are 3 year money because when we ask you to make something in quantity at scale, it takes time to deliver. We have military personnel money. That's 1 year money. That's salaries. And then we have military construction money, which is 5 year money because building buildings takes a long time, right? I bring all this up to say when the money is appropriated, it goes into the bank accounts and it just sits there. It requires government people, back to our contracting and acquisition folks, a warranted contract officer to obligate those dollars to say that the government agrees to spend that money, which then basically puts it in escrow, right? So if you think about, again, if you treat your government like you treat yourself or your home or your family, this will either make sense or you'll be like, the government doesn't make any sense at all. But either way, it's a good framework to think about this. So if I have money just sitting in my bank account, that's great. I'm liquid. That's your appropriation. The obligation is when I sign up for Netflix. It's probably not such a good one. Something you're on contract for. I sign a car lease and I say, I'm going to pay this much for the next 3 years. I don't have to pay all that money up front, but now I'm contractually obligated to pay month over month over month, or a car note or whatever, your mortgage, right? That's an obligation. Bad things happen if you just decide that you don't want to pay that anymore. So contract officers obligate dollars to pay to vendors for the things that the government needs. Once the check is cut to the contractor, now you have execution, and that money's gone. It's out of your bank account. You've paid the bill on that. So we have appropriation, we have obligation, and we have expenditures. Now, for all of the budget nerds out there that are already commenting, well, but you forgot this thing. I got it. There's more to it than that. But like the people out there with PhDs in acquisition science are not the prime audience here. It's, keep in mind, we do this show, and we do this show at the Frontier House, the startup forward operating base in Washington, D.C., so we can educate new people coming into this. We can get into the 401 on how money is appropriated, obligated, and expended if enough people want to put it in the comments that they think that they need to know the intricacies of how that happens. But I'm telling you, at the wave top level, there's obligations, there's appropriations, obligations, and expenditures, and that's what you need to know specifically for the purposes of reconciliation and the understanding of that, and why one big beautiful bill is what it is and why it's important going forward. So Congress appropriates money, and then contracting officers are obligated. Well, when you have an appropriation and then you have an administration change, the new admin comes in and talks to the Congress and goes, hey, there's a lot of money liquid in these accounts that has not yet been obligated. Now, this doesn't change Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution. That money has still been appropriated to the executive agency, and there's a threshold, and it's called the reprogramming threshold. So you have an above and below threshold for reprogramming activities. And reprogramming just means that the executive branch department, in this case, the Department of War, can move the money that has been appropriated in ways that they need to meet current needs, whatever that is. That limit for the Department of War is $15 million. So any money that the Department of War wants to move over $15 million, they have to go back to Congress and say, hey, can I reprogram this? And it's a process. It's not the worst, but it's still a pain in the ass. Reconciliation is an agreement in the Congress that goes back over previous fiscal years, finds unobligated, but still appropriated dollars, and says, hey, why don't you just scoop this all up into a big law and tell me I can do different stuff with it? The Trump administration went in and found, in context of how much money we're talking about here, the Department of War went in and found $24.4 billion just for Golden Dome alone. We are talking hundreds of billions of dollars from previous Congresses and previous administrations that was still not obligated, and in certain cases, not expended, that were repurposed for national security. When I say to whoever I'm talking to, we are living in once in a lifetime investments into national security, this is exactly what I mean. You can't go back into the books and find another round of hundreds of billions of dollars to reallocate to national security. The dollars just aren't there. It was a one-time thing, and they dug as deep as possible to reallocate to national security. Could there be a second reconciliation package? Absolutely, there could, but it's not going to be nearly to the scale of the first one. This is once in a lifetime money that is being directly allocated to national security. We are in a bubble right now, whether you know it, it feels like it. This will not happen again. You will never again see in your lifetime, short of World War III, a bill that comes out. If you go into OB3, Big Beautiful Bill Reconciliation, it just says in there, $1 billion for low-cost drones. Never again will you see that outside of World War III. So, big, beautiful bill, reconciliation. Also, very interesting. Well, maybe not interesting. Interesting to me. Maybe interesting to you. It should be interesting to you. That's the point. The difference between discretionary dollars and mandatory dollars. So, when we talk about the expenditures of the federal government, the casuals or the normies or the drive-bys, whatever you call somebody who thinks they know something that don't, often point to, oh, the Department of War gets half the American budget. We're doing a little bit of lying by omission there, ladies and gentlemen. The U.S. federal government expends about $7 trillion last year. Even if the Department of War budget was $1 trillion, that's not half. So why do people say that, and why are they not technically lying, but definitely misleading? Because we have two pots of money in the federal government when it comes to expenditures. You have mandatory and discretionary spending. Mandatory spending is Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, veterans programs, and other welfare programs. The Congress does not debate those programs and that spending in the annual appropriations process. They are mandatory and you will spend them. This is why Social Security is such a big problem, because it's mandatory spending. Social Security reform is like incredibly difficult to do, and that system's going to keep paying out until it can't. On the other hand, we have the discretionary budget. That is, in fact, what Congress fights over every year. If you look at total expenditures for the federal government, my numbers aren't accurate here, but again, like all of the snipers out there, the budget and number and grammar snipers out there, cool your jets. We're dealing with big numbers. If you look at 100% of federal outlays in the last fiscal year, 60+% go to mandatory programs. About 7 to 10% get allocated to paying the interest on our debt. And the remainder of that goes to what we fight about in Congress, the difference between defense and non-defense accounts. Total expenditures, you're seeing something to the tune of, let's call it 50-50. And that's where people say the Department of War gets half the federal budget. It's not true. Half of the discretionary budget, kinda. And when you look at that, it makes a ton of sense, because last time I checked, the State Department really only hires people, contracts services, and then builds embassies. And while building an embassy could be expensive, we only have so many of them. There's only so many countries and so many places to build an embassy. A Ford-class aircraft carrier is $17 billion. Okay. To put that in perspective, even just in the Department of War, one aircraft carrier is more expensive than the entire annual budget of U.S. Special Operations Command. So, yes, the Department of War spends a lot of money. They are also the only federal agency that buys aircraft carriers, stealth bombers, and hypersonic missiles. So, yeah, sure. I bring all that up to say, if you're still following at this point, congratulations, you are a marathoner. I bring all that up to say is discretionary spending is subject to appropriation, continuing resolution, and government shutdown. Mandatory spending is not. Mandatory spending will continue to pay out during continuing resolutions and government shutdowns. Now, the agency operations to pay those out may not, but the money still goes out the door, right? Reconciliation is mandatory spending. So government shutdowns, continuing resolutions, all of the one big beautiful bill reconciliation dollars for national security continue to spend just as well as any green money spends any day of the week without consideration to government shutdown or reconciliation. It is a masterful tool at ensuring that you have the resources to do what you say you're going to do as an administration. And in this case, it's national security in a really big way, and that money continues to spend. So On the business side of this, you need to be very clear in understanding as you are proposing to contracts, you're talking to your customers, you're seeking future contracts and future funding, what dollars they're using. Not only color of money, but are they able to execute reconciliation dollars, or are they waiting on appropriated dollars? Because there's a big difference in when those dollars show up, given how the government is functioning on a daily basis. As we know, we're sitting in the middle of a continuing resolution right now that's supposed to be resolved shortly, fingers crossed. But as of January 2026, we still do not have a fiscal year 26 enacted appropriation. So we are October, November, December, January, 4 months into the fiscal year for 2026, and we still do not have an enacted budget. You got to know where your money's coming from, ladies and gentlemen. All right, moving on. Follow-ons from the reviews of acquisition process, 90-day MDAP cancellation and review, executing that. More Golden Dome to include the Shield IDIQ. So MDA named this contract Shield. Makes sense. Golden Dome. How about that? We're so witty. The Shield IDIQ, indefinite demand, indefinite quantity IDIQ contract, is a $151 billion contract that is good for 10 years. They have put over 1,000 companies onto this contract for potential contracting activities in support of Golden Dome. So going back earlier, I said you could have the best customer in the world who has funds on hand. If you don't have a contract, you're still not spending that money, you're still not delivering, and you're still not getting paid. If you're on the Shield IDIQ for the next 10 years, you have access to $151 billion in funds that any day of the week, a government customer could say, you meet the requirements for this. Here's your task order on this contract. Not a bad place to be if you've got something that helps Golden Dome. Also, the subtext there is it's really super embarrassing if you do, and this is the first time you're hearing about it because this happened back in August. So if you're not on it, and you should be, now you're making phone calls asking for on-ramp and off-ramp windows so that you can get on there if it's not an open enrollment. I hope that your boss is not listening if that's the case. Lots of Golden Dome MDA stuff. Ground-based radar, more radar, southeast radar. Yeah, radar. Okay, moving on. Lots of MDA stuff. It is seriously, I hope your boss is not watching if you are in anything Golden Dome and you're not on the Shield IDIQ. Okay, so back to killing JSIDs. So they killed JSIDs because it was a monster and it deserved to die. It's being replaced with a bunch of new stuff, which if you saw my preliminary advertising for the University of Tennessee Go to Government Business Development certificate that we're running here out of the Frontier House in Washington, D.C. this year. I threw out a bunch of crazy ass acronyms because we love acronyms, and there's a whole bunch of new ones, and you got to know this stuff. The RAB, the MIA, the JAR. Yeah, that's right. So lots of implementation messages on what all these things are. The RAB is the Requirements and Resourcing Alignment Board, which is co-chaired by the Deputy Secretary of War and the Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So they've gone away from every general in the world having to put their signature on something through the JSIDS process in a venue, a foray, if you will, called the JROC, the Joint Requirements Oversight Council, and they've replaced it with the RAB, the Requirements and Resourcing Alignment Board, to make sure that there is senior level executive approval of assets, projects, developments, acquisitions that support the key operational problems, not an unnecessary system of hurdles and stupidity. It also establishes the MIA, Mission Engineering and Integration Activity. So what does that do? A few years back, 2023 appropriations and 2023 National Defense Authorization, we had a program that was authorized and appropriated called APFIT. The program to accelerate the procurement and fielding of innovative technologies. That is your Valley of Death Fund. Lots of people were really good at getting SIBRs. RIP SIBR, we'll talk about that in a minute. Really good at getting SIBRs, but they don't transition because the people who write your SIBR awards for $1 million are not the same people who would buy that thing when your research and development is done and buy thousands of them. And that gap in there is not only an awareness gap of, oh, I didn't even know that we were building that thing. Even if you brought the coolest, newest thing today to somebody who's on the acquisition side of life, they've got this thing called the POM, the Program Object Memorandum, and the PPBE, the Program Planning, Programming, Budgeting, and Execution process, which is a 3-year process of determining how we're going to buy something. So you take your JSIDs and take 800 days to determine what you're going to buy, and then put a 3-year process on actually buying it. And now you have the proverbial Valley of Death. That is only one of many valleys of deaths, but that's the most prominent. And APFIT's goal is to bridge that by allowing in-year of execution for completed prototypes that meet urgent warfighter needs that are produced by small businesses, with procurement dollars from 10 to 50 million to gap that 3-year, oh shit, we didn't know this was a thing. Now I have to go plan for it. 36-month cycle. Procurement dollars are 36 months. If you got that right, gold star, and it covers that gap in a larger and it's a Band-Aid. It's a Band-Aid. Don't get me wrong. It's not, the end all be all to all the problems. It's a Band-Aid. It's a Band-Aid program. It's very clearly so. It's get rid of the Valley of Death. Don't give me a Valley of Death program, right? The reason that happens is because the RDT&E community over here, starting with like S&T and DARPA and SCO and people who live in windowless rooms for their entire life with doors that are 3 feet thick, are making weird shit. The guy who's buying it that works at an acquisition organization has no freaking clue. And so your acquisition and your research community are too far apart. The MIA brings them together. It directs the creation of the Mission Engineering and Integration Activity, which is headed up by the Undersecretary of Research and Engineering and the Undersecretary of Acquisition and Sustainment, with the goal of aligning the communications and engagement between the two so that the R&E community can transmit what's coming earlier so that the acquisition community can get ahead of preparing to buy it. This is fixing the Valley of Death, paving over it so it's a nice road and it no longer exists, rather than a Band-Aid program that's a bridge over a valley that people still fall in, right? It also establishes the creation of the Joint Acceleration Reserve. So this is an idea of internal minutia in the department that a certain amount of money will be held in the department to deal with near-term issues. So I've done a lot of bashing on JSIDs, and it's terrible, and I'm so glad it's dead. I dance on the grave of JSIDs. But under the joint staff, there is a process, well, I guess it's dead now, but there was a process called the JRAC, the Joint Rapid Acquisition Cell. The JRAC was the fast process for no shit urgent needs. Think MRAP, like our people are dying and we need to solve this. JSIDs be damned, JRAC be damned. We have to do something. And when a request called a Joint Urgent Operational Needs Statement was submitted from the field. We are under attack by a thing that we don't have a solution for. When I was in northern Iraq in 2016, I wrote a Joint Urgent Operational Needs Statement for a counter UAS system because ISIS had figured out that they could use drones, commercially available DJI type drones, to conduct reconnaissance on us. Okay, no big surprise there, no big stretch. We recognize really quickly two things. One, they actually were starting to use the reconnaissance drones for spotting their mortars, which starts to get scary when one day they can't hit you within a football field and the next day they put one pretty close to your base. But then two, everyone at the time having been a, whatever time that was, 10, 15 year veteran of the global war on terror, really, oh man, it's only a matter of time before they start arming these things. I left Iraq in June, July. October, the unit that replaced me got a hand grenade dropped on their armored vehicle. Fortunately, nobody was hurt by a drone deployed by ISIS. They weaponized from our first indications that they were using drones for reconnaissance and spotting their mortars to dropping the first hand grenade took about 3 to 4 months. Joint Urgent Operational Needs Statements fill that gap. If you want to hear more about that story, go to the Drone Wars podcast. I think I was the first episode of Drone Wars podcast. We go way deeper into that story if for whatever reason that's interesting to you. But anyways, back to it. That's what the Joint Urgent Operational Needs Statement is there for. And that's supposed to be rapid funding. Problem. The JRAC, or whatever its successor is going to be, is not funded. There's no money. There's no money just hanging out in the JRAC like, oh shit, we need to do that. Services have to go in and cut flesh and bone to find the money in the year of execution that then they can put into a reprogramming request to send to Congress to move the money. Ash Carter mastered this process to do MRAP. Now, MRAP ended up being a giant piece of shit that we left thousands of them in Iraq for the bad guy, or in Afghanistan for the fucking Taliban. But that's a whole different story. The way he got it done was a masterclass. That's what that's there for. That's not funded. The Joint Acceleration Reserve is a multi-billion-dollar flexible fund to bridge valley of death between prototypes, programs of record, and meet urgent needs. Congress is going to have something to say about this because they don't like funds or reserves. My understanding from talking to some folks who are in the machine here doing a lot of the restructuring is this money is going to exist in the department and will not be an additional appropriations request. They're going to deal with in year of execution and look for streamlined ways to go through that reprogramming process or utilize that money in near-term construction of, the next budget to make sure that all the way up until pens go down on budget submission to OMB, that they still have a reserve to meet urgent near-term needs. So you can see across the board here, the people who are doing these activities, some I know very personally and are friends and colleagues, these are the nation's experts on all of the problems. And these are real, meaningful, and lasting solutions for this new renaissance of national security and war tech ecosystems. People who want to serve their country in the way that they can. And if their way of doing that is providing capability, cutting edge, best in class capabilities to our nation's warfighters who have to put their ass on the line every day, we want them to be able to do that. And these reforms really target the reasons why it's, one, so hard to do it, to enter into the defense space, and two, why people just don't, right? It's just too hard. It's too confusing. Things like the jar, the me, the RAB, killing JSIDs, focusing on CSOs and OTAs and using the adaptive acquisition framework are all things that sound like nerd shit, but these are really the actions that are changing what we have been complaining about and have been hindering our capabilities for our warfighter for decades. These are the real fixes. And this is why it's important to know that, because all of these reforms are going to spur more and more and more implementations and new processes, and there's going to be new ways of doing things. I had engagement with a colleague of mine the other day, and they were lamenting over the death of Cyber, and we'll get into that. But like R.I.P. Cyber, at least for right now. And they're like, well, but I don't know what to do, and my clients don't know what to do, and my companies are. And I'm like, Cyber not being reauthorized only took away the process, right? It was a streamlined process created decades ago for special classes of people to have an easier way of doing business. SBIR is run by the Small Business Administration. It's not a Department of Defense or Department of War program. It's a Small Business Administration program, which legally mandates that they take a certain part of their research and development dollars and allocate it to certain classes of people, right? Small businesses, veterans, women, pick your 8A group, right? That's all it is. It's a process, and it's a forcing function to spend your money in a certain way. The way SBIR is funded is through a 3% tax on the total RDT&E appropriation. It's money that's there. The money didn't go away. The person who could have written you a Cyber yesterday can still write you an RDT&E contract today. They just don't have to because you meet some criteria. They can because you're the best technology and they want to do business with you. None of the money has gone away. The process has. The entry point of having that front door went away. That sucks. I get that. But as we've seen in all of these directives, the new way forward is to use CSOs. So that's how you communicate the requirement. I need this thing. Does anybody already make it? And then to contract using OTAs, which are far less burdensome. That's the new way forward. Just do that. Take the same RDT&E dollars that you have, tell the customer that wanted to give you an SBIR to issue a CSO, propose to it, win it, and then get contracted through an OTA. That should happen in about 60 days. And unlike SBIR that has a statutory cap on it, right? 1.5 for a Cyber Phase 2, up to 15 million for a StratFi if you work with the Air Force and you can use that tool. OTAs don't have any statutory limit beyond what that contracting officer or what that organization is allowed to cut a contract to. And if you're talking about, say, SOCOM, Special Operations Command, they can cut $100 million E&E prototype OTA without even thinking about it. So actually, there's some burdensome regulation or statutory limitation on SBIR that goes away. That makes life a lot easier for talking about those larger dollars. Maybe not your first million on a Cyber Phase 2, but all of the jujitsu that you had to do to get a StratFi kind of goes away because you can use a prototype OT at that level easy. The conversation went down the rabbit hole of, yeah, but that's not a thing, and they're not doing that. I can point you to a couple websites and we'll link them below. One Nation Innovation is a good one. One Nation Innovation is a 501c3 run by a Native American nation. One Nation OTA. That is heavily used by USDR&E, SOCOM, other agencies, DIU, to cut their OTs. In the last 3 months, there's probably been 30 OTA opportunities on One Nation Innovation. And a lot of them are for what people want to be doing with this reconciliation money. There's a new way of doing business, ladies and gentlemen. CSO, OTA, RAB, MIA, JAR. It's happening. It's real. And as I'm sure everybody was sick of me on social media, if you don't know this, you are literally missing billions of dollars of opportunities. Time now. We'll put the link below. One Nation Innovation. They've got all kinds of stuff live right now. I'll make sure in all of these episodes going forward, we have an opportunity overhaul or overview at the end of it. We'll make sure we get these things out of there. But I'm telling you right now, if you go to One Nation Innovation, see what they have live. And then if you really want to break your heart, if this is the first time you're hearing about this and you really want to like torture yourself, go to not the active solicitations, but go to the closed ones. See what you've missed in the last 2 or 3 months. It may make you cry. Again, I hope your boss isn't watching. All right, moving on. J-Rock, restore. Oh, well, we changed the name, obviously. Not statutorily. That is actually in law. That's one of the things that has to be a law. You have to pass a law to change the name. They haven't done that yet. But there is certain jurisdiction for the executive branch to do it without law. It's not law. The next president could change that back if they want. But right now, all good. Okay, so SBIR, SBIR, Small Business Innovation Research Program. Let's talk about that real quick. So SBIR created decades ago to specifically create opportunities for certain classes of people as defined by the Small Business Administration, which is what they're there to do. Copy. Has been a great tool for the Department of War Defense for decades. It's an easy front door. SBIR 1, your phase 1. I'm sure everybody's familiar with it. It's a technical feasibility study, basically a book report. You get a couple $100,000. Your phase 2 is you have to develop your, first up prototype. You can get certain types of follow-on awards to that. You could get, an additional SBIR. You could get if you work with the Air Force or Space Force, you get TACFI or STRATFI up to $15 million, which is great. You have to bring in matching funds. I'm sure everybody knows this, from private investors or from non-RDT&E dollars, right? So to do a STRATFI, theoretically, you bring in a certain number of SBIR dollars, that fenced taxed money that lives inside the department. Then you bring in non-SBIR dollars, other RDT&E money that's from other than a SBIR account. And then you bring in investor money. So you have like this matching thing. And then you get up to $15 million. It's great. Nobody doubts the value of the program for the people who use the program the way that they use it, that it's intended to use. It is called America's Seed Fund. Like, let's just not beat around the bush about that. It's called America's Seed Fund. There is a certain amount of implication in there that you are seeding businesses that will grow, thrive, flourish, and bear fruit, right? Like, let's just take the whole biology route here. If America's Seed Fund is actually meant to do that, the American people, citizens, taxpayers, the warfighter should get some fruit out of that at some point. What's happened over the last 20 or 30 years, and this is going to get highly contentious, and I got it. Like, come at me, bro. There's been a cottage industry of people who have learned how to run businesses that live off SBIR dollars. The research is out there. I am happy to show receipts, but over a longitudinal study of 4 years, there were 600 plus SBIR 1s and 2s that were issued. 29 companies got over 25% of those. That is not seeding businesses that are going to grow, flourish, and bear fruit. That is a cottage industry who has figured out how to run an engineering company on dollars that were intended for something very different. The very different something that we need. More national security businesses, more growth, more deconsolidation. These are called SBIR mills. They live and exist in these dollars. They know how to win them. They keep their companies inside the caps and the structure that keep them eligible. And look, man, don't hate the player, hate the game. Okay, fine. It still needs to die then. I don't hate the player. I hate the game. Let's end that game. Let's make SBIR what it should be, America's seed fund, and put them into the companies that have outsized growth, return, and products over the last 2 or 3 years. If you go down the Silicon Valley Defense Group NatSec 100, probably barring SpaceX, everyone else on that list has probably won a SBIR at some point. I'd roll the dice. I would roll the dice at 75% of the NatSec 100 has at least one SBIR. There is no doubt when those kinds of companies who intend to grow, scale, and be real defense businesses utilize that money, it is impactful. It is not impactful when SBIR mills live off that money, seek no follow-on funding, commercialize nothing, deliver nothing, and they live in research and development world. That's regular RDT&E money. That's why we have an RDT&E account, so research firms can continue to provide research and prototypes to the government. There's an implication in SBIR as America's seed fund that we're growing businesses. And there's an incongruence there that has become a problem. When I was in the Senate working for, at the time, the ranking member of the Emerging Threats and Capabilities Subcommittee, we went through reauthorization last time. And there were two issues, the SBIR mill issue and foreign ownership, control, and interest, FOCI issues from adversarial nations who in different ways, shapes, and forms have figured out how to penetrate the SBIR program because it is inherently open. There's not a lot of security around it because guess what? If a brand new company starts up on somebody's couch in Palo Alto, they are not prepared to go through a full scope poly for a top secret clearance. So it's inherently lax in security, and our adversaries have found ways to take advantage of that as they do. And the plan, along with the Senate Small Business Committee, was to do a reauthorization back in 2023. Back in 2023, we had a 2-year life cycle on it. And then we would implement fixes to the mills and the FOCI issues, and we'd get it reauthorized. None of that happened. Senator Ernst introduced the Innovate Act, which laid out a very practical set of reforms for SBIR to make sure that it is a healthy program that does what it's intended to do. No reforms were accepted. No reforms were taken into the bill or taken into any bill. Arguments continued. I have long been out of government at this point, but the Innovate Act did not pass. It was not included into the National Defense Authorization Act for a million reasons, which I will not attempt to speculate on. Negotiations are nuanced and fragile and based on human beings, and it didn't get reauthorized. That means there is no SBIR program as I live and breathe today. R&D money, SBIR funds that were left over from fiscal year 2025 that can still execute this year, can execute. Anyone with the authority to can issue an SBIR phase 3 because it does not use the fenced SBIR dollars. They put their own program money against it, and they can use SBIR 3 as a vehicle for a contract, very similar to an IDIQ or an OTA. You've already met sole source determination. You've already been competed. They can just put money on the contract, but it has to come from their service dollars. It can't be other SBIR dollars. So, but the SBIR 3 exists, and they can still use that within rules, guidance, regulation. So that's fine. It may come back. It may not, but as of today, if you go down onto the YouTube and it says posted 1 hour ago, there is no SBIR. And from somebody who's been around the hill for a little while, NDAA will get passed this year, November, December, maybe, best case. The FY27 bill will maybe be enacted by 27 with maybe another reconciliation in an election year. With everything else that's going on in the world, the idea that there would be a clean reauthorization for SBIR that would pass this Congress, zero. Until NDAA of this year, which we'll probably see a draft come out of committee, call it May, June, July. That'll be a leading indicator of maybe what gets passed. Again, I don't do a lot of speculations. I guess I'm doing a lot today. I'm going to guess the earliest we see SBIR reauthorized, November, December of this year with NDAA. That doesn't mean the Department of War can't take action today and just do it themselves. Why not? All right. The mandate to fence a certain amount of dollars and allocate them in a certain way was forced upon them by the Small Business Administration. If they just want to say, we're going to cut 3% of our total RDT&E budget to small businesses that are showing the behavior of growing, scaling, creating product, delivering to the warfighter, and attempting to be a real defense company that delivers actual products in procurement, and that's how they want to allocate that money. I'm sure there are enough lawyers at the Pentagon that they can figure out how to legally fence off 3% of their budget in RDT&E for that, and they could just run their own program right now, and they don't need to wait for Congress or the SBA or anything. They have all the jurisdiction in the world and all the lawyers to figure out how to basically run SBIR right now. We don't need to wait for anybody, but we'll probably see something maybe that looks like reauthorization November, December. I don't think we need it. I think CSOs, OTAs using the adaptive acquisition framework as designed is a hell of a way to do business without any other burdens, regulations, SBA up anybody's butt talking about you got to do something. We could argue about that all day, but anybody that's out there hollering from the rooftops that it's a national security issue and we're hindering small businesses and we're not doing innovation and we're going to lose to the CCP, go back to reconciliation dollars, ladies and gentlemen. Those are mandatory funds and those are spending like gold right now. Those OTAs that are on O&I, they're going to start spending reconciliation dollars with no consideration of is SBIR a real thing? And the companies that are really doing the right things should be able to capitalize on those in a way that really doesn't matter. There is no national security threat from not having SBIR. Yes. Is that 1, 2, 3 person company that's spinning out of a university going to have a little bit harder of a time trying to figure out how to work with the Department of Defense? Sure as hell they are. Yep, got it. But trade that for larger ceilings, shorter contract windows, and execution of reconciliation dollars to buy procurement quantity resources, capabilities of the shit that's already available today by the hundreds of new defense companies that have entered over the last 3 years. Yeah, I'll take that bet all day because 2027 is, last time I checked, still a real concern. And if we're going to make that window a theoretical research project, doesn't really answer the mail at this point. I need everyone who does a thing today to be doing it at 10 and 100x and getting on contract and getting that in the hands of the warfighter. So if you want to fight about SBIR, please send it. Hit me in the comments. We can talk to whoever you want. I've been over this left, right, up, and down. I hope it comes back. I hope it comes back with reforms, but in no way, shape, or form is there a national security threat due to the lack of SBIR. As of today, as I live and breathe, RIP SBIR. We'll see what happens. All right, we're going to wrap up here with acquisition transformation strategy has been published. The WAS, the Warfighting Acquisition Strategy, or Warfighting Acquisition System. Yet another one of the acronyms that, if you don't know, along with MIA, RAB, JAR, CSO, and OTA, I feel bad for you at this point. The Warfighting Acquisition System was presented in the acquisition transformation strategy. It explains all of what they're going to do. The new way of doing business, focused on speed, efficiency, and delivery to the warfighter. This is the new way of doing business in no uncertain terms. Get on board and learn it, love it, live it, or just quit. Because no amount of complaining that I don't know how to do the thing is going to help you right now, because this is a freight train that is moving at full speed, and you're either on or you're off. A lot of following activities we're seeing here. So we saw earlier on, thou shalt software pathway on the adaptive acquisition framework. Thou shalt consider mostly CSO, OTA, overhaul, review, warfighting acquisition system submission or publication, memos to follow that, implementation guidance, establishes other transaction authorities and commercial solutions openings as a default solicitation method, mandates OTAs as a preferred agreement type, requires written justification to use traditional FAR-based contracts. And this is my favorite thing. And again, I don't want to call out anybody out there because they are quiet professionals working in the shadows, really, truly the heroes of this movement here to fix the Department of War in the most real ways possible. The required written justification for a FAR-based contract. There's one individual out there who is a big part of this, and I will preserve their anonymity for the protection of the innocent. But I don't know how many times I've said to them, other transaction authorities should be flipped on their head, and they should just be called transaction authorities, and the FAR-based stuff should be other only in the extreme case of buying an aircraft carrier. The administrative burden and really the professional risk you would incur right now to try to do a FAR-based contract on something that clearly should roll on an OTA is enough of an incentive to counteract the I'm going to go to jail if I use an OTA. That is that kind of legacy attitude. The fact that they would have to justify that they want to use the worst possible method of buying something that we need today is enough to deter anyone from using FAR in only the worst case scenario. We have really turned the corner. Other transaction authorities are just transaction authorities now. The other is the shit we will almost never use. And that could not be better in ways that I don't know how to qualify that for you at this point if you don't understand it. But these initiatives that have happened this year, 10 and 20 years from now, will still matter in the same way we are still dealing with the ghost of Goldwater Nichols in all the things that we're fixing right now. And that came out in 1986. All right. Last one, a couple of last things happened right at the end of the year. So now we're in December. Everybody's moving into American Ramadan, starting Thanksgiving and ending like the first business day after New Year's. Operational tempo in the US just generally comes to a screeching halt. Not these guys. The Department of War, the Congress, everybody is still cranking out super significant actions into the wee hours of the year. Again, couldn't be happier. Mid-December, we get passage of the National Defense Authorization Act. Whole other episode on that. So many things happened. Again, it's 5,000 something page document. Even the stuff that only matters to this is a lot. But Congress, both the House and the Senate, conference, right? How a bill becomes a law. Remember, Schoolhouse Rock, Professor Mike, nice to meet you. The House writes a bill. The Senate writes a bill. They pass it in their chambers. They come together in conference. They have to agree on the exact same text from the exact same bill. They bring it back to their chambers. They vote on that in totality. It passes. Then it goes to the president. NDAA was passed mid-December. It's massive. It's got all kinds of great stuff in it. We'll dig into that in a future episode because there's lots of stuff in there that you need to know on what to do. So when we talk about being in the world of like leading and lagging indicators, right? Your leading indicators of what is Congress telling the department to do, which, by the way, that is Congress's job. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution says the enumerated responsibilities of Congress. That is where the Congress tells the executive branch what to do. Article 1, Section 8 is generally that area. More specifically, it has clauses in there that say to govern the rules of land and naval forces, to raise armies, maintain navies, and declare war. Congress is in charge of the Department of Defense, ladies and gentlemen, Department of War. That's civilian control of the government. To govern the rules of land and naval forces means to tell the Department of War what to do, and that happens every year in the National Defense Authorization Act. When the draft comes out, you can see what Congress is thinking. When the final bill comes out, you're in lagging indicators, and it's from 1 day immediate enactment all the way through phased implementation plans in 90, 180 days. You need to read this because it is telling you how the Department of War is going to behave in the following year. So we'll do a whole one on that. Anyways, another EO, ensuring American space superiority. Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation Overhaul Implementation. The SHIELD IDIQ contract award announcement. 1,014 companies on this IDIQ for a total contract ceiling of $151 billion. Seriously, they have taken the need to contract off the table. If you are one of those 1,014 companies, you now have a contract. All you need is a customer to say, I need that thing, and get through cutting a task order. That's it. The funding's in place. The contract's in place. Now, all bullshit aside, no more crying, oh, I'm a small business and nobody listens to me. If you're on this contract, you have money and you have contract. If no one's buying your stuff, you're either not communicating to the customer or you're not delivering something that they want. All bullshit aside, at this point, I'm very fortunate to work with a lot of different companies, a lot of different investors, talk to a lot of defense leaders. To my VC folks out there that are putting the money into these companies, in this instant, there is no more complaining about how bad the Department of War acquisition system is. If they are on the SHIELD IDIQ, they have access to $151 billion of obligated funds. Well, put in that account. Obligated means you have a contract, but kind of quasi-obligated funds. There's $151 billion in the account, and the contract's already been written. All they need now is demand signal. If people are saying, oh, it's because, nope, it's something's wrong. Something's wrong. Go figure out what it is. Talk to your customer. Talk to your customer. If you don't have a task order, talk to your customer because you're not communicating with them and they don't know that you have a thing that they need. If you've communicated with them and they haven't cut you a task order, figure out why the thing that you're making doesn't meet their need, because they're in this system with MDA and the SHIELD IDIQ. There's no hurdles. They've all been removed. If they're not contracting, that's on them. If they're taking their time to obligate and expend the money, that's on them. You should know that, though. You should know that they want your thing and when they want it. There are no barriers in this system. They have money. They have contract. That's it. No crybaby stuff there. The whole world isn't that good. Honestly, the department could probably run multiple iterations of that kind of contracting or that kind of structuring in these large IDIQs that are multi-vendor is underselling the whole thing. But you could do this. It reduces a lot of barriers. It's very efficient. If you're not getting money and they're spending money, something is wrong, and it's more of a you problem than a them problem at that point. Now we're getting into the latter end of the year, like last days, and into the new year. Executive order prioritizing the warfighter defense contracting, banning stock buybacks and dividends for underperforming contractors, ties executive bonuses to production speed and stock price, mandates executive incentive pay linked to on-time delivery and production metrics, caps executive base salaries for underperformers, and enables the Department of War to use the Defense Production Act for enforcement. If you're on X and you follow the president, he has called out some specific folks on this one. This is targeted. This is directly targeted at the people who have been the only ones doing business for the last 10 or 20 years. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. More targeted reform by the president. He made a statement on executive compensation. The president stated publicly that no executive should be allowed to make in excess of $5 million unless companies invest in additional production capacity. This has been an issue for a long time in the defense reform and innovation world. We've always talked about doing multi-year contracting, right? The issue is, by law, we appropriate for 1 year. Whether you can spend the dollars over a number of years is different from the fact that we don't do advanced appropriations. We only appropriate in totality year over year. What you do if you do multi-year procurement or multi-year appropriations, you tie the hands of future Congresses. If we say, hey, we are guaranteeing that we're going to spend this money year over year over year, and 9/11 happens, the government's already contractually obligated to spend that money regardless of what happened, right? It's like I have a cell phone right now, and if, that tree hits my roof and I need to like get a new roof and I have to make a decision between paying for the roof or cutting my cell phone bill, I can cut my cell phone bill at any point. I'm not obligated to that. In the instances of advanced appropriations, you are obligated to keep paying for that. And now you've got a hole in your roof and you still have to pay a bill on a thing that you don't need or can't use, and there's no way out of it without penalty. So we typically stay away from multi-year procurements, just from the sense of, creating unfunded liabilities for the future year's Congress, but also, and probably more important, the history of certain large defense contractors in the rare instances where they have gotten multi-year procurement and appropriations have still failed to deliver on time. The conversation always went, well, if I had a more stable demand signal, I could get economies of scale. I could secure my supply chain better. I could do long lead items in advance procurement of those things. I could invest in my manufacturing lines because I know we have sustained business over a number of years, right? The shipyards are like get killed over this to sustain work and workforce and things like that. And there have been numerous instances where those have happened. And the money went to stock buybacks, not manufacturing lines and long lead items and bringing down price through economies of scale. The president knows this, and that's why he did that. It's not only reforming the process and the system that is left over from literally the General Motors way of doing business when McNamara was the Secretary of Defense back in the 70s. It's breaking down the behaviors of the people who have benefited from that process in a real way that is going to bring competition and openness and innovation, acceleration, all the things to the environment. You have to not only kill the system, but you have to kill the incentives that keep people maintaining that system. A 30-day contract performance review, 60-day contract provisions, stock buyback rule. Big, we're going to do a whole episode on this one too. Big artificial intelligence strategy for the Department of War. Holy huge and shit. This is so important. This was one of the biggest risks that we were running. Like CMMC takes care of cyber. There was a risk management framework kind of for AI. I mean, ladies and gentlemen, we are living in, if Terminator had Terminator 0 and they went back to life before everything, when like in all like the flashbacks when somebody makes like the first Terminator, that's where we're at right now. Like, let's be real. The robots can fight wars right now. Our ability to manage that risk management framework, the policies behind it, when, where, how we're going to use that, like, did not really exist. Like the risk management frameworks for AI in warfighting systems, the DoD 3009, really lacking. This is huge, and this is strategy. So this is Department of War strategy. You will see subsequent directives, guidance, DODDs, DODIs, implementation guidance, service level. But if you're in AI, this is your new Holy Grail 10 commandments, and track everything that spurs off of this, because this strategy will have many babies, and that will guide and determine the market that you work in for AI with the Department of War. Unquestionably, this is your new business model. So get around that. All right. Also, Department of War innovation ecosystem overhaul, public facing implementation signals, reorganizing governance, priority setting, reduce fragmentation, and speed to delivery. We've already seen some of this. The Undersecretary for Research and Engineering held a technical engagement at Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab last week. We're going to start seeing more and more industry engagements. Do not confuse industry engagements by the Department of War with pay an astronomical amount to go to this conference run by a company who runs conferences. They are different. When you see an engagement, an industry engagement by a DIU, a USDR&E, these are official government activities to engage with industry. You can go on sam.gov and set an alert for Industry Day, industry engagement, advance briefs to industry. These are the engagements that you should be at. I'm not saying don't go to conferences. I'm not saying some conferences aren't better than others. Go there, 100%. It's your business environment. You should go to trade shows. I'm not saying don't. But I'm saying don't confuse that with an official industry engagement where they can actually go there and tell you the demand signal and what they need and how they need it, especially if you have people in your company or in your close-in ecosystem who are cleared. They're having these things at classified levels. R&E Undersecretary for Research and Engineering held their technical exchange meeting at a secret level. SCO did one earlier this week at a top secret level. If you have cleared individuals, the government will tell you what's going on. You just need to know there's a big difference from a top secret SCO meeting. Maybe a month ago now, the new Navy Rapid Capabilities Office did an unclassified industry engagement and then a classified one the next day. Don't confuse those with fill in the blank conference. They're both valuable in different ways, but the innovation ecosystem engagement is what you need to prioritize. Because it's great to hear somebody hypothesize and pontificate about blah, 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 blah on a stage at a pay-for conference. Is a lot different when the Assistant Secretary for Mission Capabilities is standing in front of you and saying, contested logistics is the number one thing that I'm looking at over the next year. Here is what I mean when I say contested logistics. If you do something in this space, email this person. All right, what else we got? Late into December, National Defense Authorization Act, a couple of implementation guidance here. We come out the front end of January, got a couple more EOs, a couple more implementation guidance. Things are starting to happen. The R&E Industry Exchange, Navy Rapid Capabilities Office launch. Starting to see these things happen. The big welcome to 2026, and we will get deep into this in the next episode. We have the release of the National Defense Strategy. The National Defense Strategy is, again, a strategy. Strategy, keep in mind, means something very specific. It's high level, right? But it's guidance, is where they're going. So when we look at national level strategy, it starts with the national security strategy out of the White House, and then we get the national defense strategy from the Department of War. You will see subsequent service level strategies and implementation guidance and modernization efforts that will be directly derived from that. If you look at the national security strategy, the national defense strategy is directly derived from that. They're nested strategies. We'll see more and more of these. This is the priority. When I talk to anybody, small business, when I talk to an investor, I say the first thing I need you to tell me is, or the first thing I'm looking for is, before we even get into any kind of conversations about, oh, how do I do this? How do I do that? What's the right contracting mechanism? What office should I talk to? Who's before any of that? The first thing we need to reconcile is, are you a priority for the Department of War? And that's not subjective. That's not your thing makes you feel good to do, and I thank you for doing that thing. But we need to be really clear-eyed. It doesn't matter if we have $1 trillion budget, 2 or 3 trillion. It's still finite resources that need to go to meet requirements, needs, and priorities. Period. Still finite resources. Are you a priority? That's not subjective. If what you do could not somehow be associated with something in the national security or the national defense strategy, you're not. And that's okay. I'm not telling you to not do that thing. I'm just saying be very clear-eyed in your world of opportunities if you're not that. Again, Golden Dome has $151 billion allocated to it. If you can do something in Golden Dome, you are a priority. Unquestionably. You can, if you do something for Golden Dome, unquestionably you are a priority. As you read through the rest of the documents, you go, oh, I do that, I do that, I do that. If you're not, just be very real. Be real with your employees, with yourself, your investors, your customers, right? Do the thing if it needs to be done. Just understand that it's not a priority, and this is a priority-focused administration. They're not doing things just to do them. There's real threats, real priorities, real short-term need, and if you're not that, identify it. Be real. Approach it as such. The National Defense Strategy will drive everything for the remainder of this administration. You only get a national defense strategy once per administration. This is it. Unless aliens show up or, I don't know, the dinosaurs come back or some shit. This is the marching orders. These are the big blue arrows for the entire defense, national security, war tech ecosystem for the next 3 years. Act accordingly. All right, that was a lot. More breakouts, more deep dives on these, NDAA, National Defense Strategy, anything else, put in the comments, email, whatever. If you want to do deep dives on this, I'm more than happy to. Just want to make sure that we are getting the best information out there, that this makes sense. The show is called Last Week in DC for a reason, because DC is fucking nuts and it doesn't make a lot of sense. Even if you live here and eat, sleep, and breathe this shit, I can't imagine what this sounds like to other people. That's what we're here for. That's why we do this. Hit me up. Let me know. It's going to be a huge year. I don't see any of this slowing down. And I would just like to say, welcome to 2026. Thank you for what you're doing, whatever that is in national security. Not everybody is a big dumb idiot like me who walks around with things on their back. Sometimes you're a genius, brilliant human being who makes the tools that big, dumb, rock-eating Marine idiots use in the field. And we thank you for that. Thank you for what you're doing. Stay the course. It's going to be a wild ride for 26, but I can't understate the fact that we are in an unprecedented, once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to fix our national security apparatus, fix national security issues, truly deter the adversaries to not fuck around and find out so that we don't have to fight World War III. And that is happening literally right now. So again, if you've listened this long, thank you. If you're doing anything in this space, thank you. Hit me up with questions, comments. Happy to do whatever makes sense for you guys. I'm out.